Eastern Hills, how we doing? Oh, that's awesome. It is so good to be here with you. I do hail from California, Central California. Visalia is literally right in the middle of the state. So 3 hours from LA, 3 hours from the Bay Area, 2 hours from the beach, and 1 hour from the mountains. And our claim to fame in Central California is that we're the agricultural capital of the world. We actually produce enough fruit and dairy to feed the entire globe in Central California. Yeah, so, but with that comes heat. You all, I'm like standing outside going, I'm gonna take all of this in because I'm flying home to like 102. And that is it gets real hot real fast once July hits, and it's gonna be hot next week. So it is really good to be with you here in Colorado, and it's like 70 degrees outside right now. Is that normal or no? That's not normal, or no, it's not. People are like, no, you should take it though, take it. So, hey, I did want to talk about, Sonia mentioned Jesus and food, because food is my favorite topic in the whole world. Any other foodies kind of out there? Yeah, you all are going to heaven. I'm just telling you right now. I'm not saying the rest of you aren't. I'm just saying foodies for sure have the pass. And to do that, what I'd like to do is look at something that gets recorded in one of the biographies of the life of Jesus. Now, you may know that we have 4 surviving biographies of the life of Jesus. And they're written by just a variety of characters. One of them is actually written by a historian, which makes sense, who converted to Christianity out of Roman pagan worship. Another was written by one of Jesus's, arguably his closest friend, his best friend. One's written by an early church missionary, and one is written by a reformed Jewish tax collector who became one of Jesus's friends and first followers. His name was Matthew. And Matthew, in his biography of the life of Jesus, he closes with like this very dramatic moment where Jesus has invited his closest friends and followers to join him on a hilltop in the northern part of Israel, where he's gonna give them one last little speech, one rally cry for the troops, if you will. And here's what Matthew records Jesus saying to him and to them. Here's what we read. Then Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. And therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you, and surely I'm with you always to the very end of the age." Now, there's a lot packed in those couple of sentences, but what I'd like to do this morning is just zoom in on 5 words of those 2 sentences and just see where that might lead us. And the 5 words are these: therefore, go and make disciples. Now, disciples, I think, can sound a little churchy, it can sound a little spiritual, but really disciple just means follower or student or learner. And Jesus is saying, go make followers of my ethic. Go make students of my way of love. Help people see my life as the blueprint for them building their lives. Therefore, go and make disciples, followers of my way. Now, here's what's really interesting, I think, about those 5 words, therefore, go and make disciples, is for the most part, for the last 2,000 years, Christian church history, the church and like global Christianity, we've all agreed we should go and do this. We should go make disciples. But that's where the agreement stops. See, the church really has never been on the same page when it comes to how we're supposed to go make these disciples. And we've tried some pretty crazy techniques or methods in terms of trying to make disciples. And some of them have been pretty extreme. For example, there was a season in the church where we've tried killing people, right? And maybe you're familiar with this season of church history. Have you heard of the Crusades? Maybe the Salem witch trials? something that we call today the Inquisition, which was basically like tribunals where they would set up and they wanted to root out anyone that they deemed was teaching like heresy or false teaching. And they killed lots and lots of people during the Inquisition. There was 3 expressions of that. One was in Spain, one was called the Roman Inquisition, and one was called the Portuguese Inquisition. Now, I'm a little more familiar with the Portuguese expression of the Inquisition. Neighborhood Church has some church partners in Portugal, and so I've been able to go several times. And in downtown Lisbon, there's a church, and it was the headquarters of the Inquisition, and it's called the Church of St. Dominic. Now, one day, as this legend has it, if you go, the tour guide will tell you this. You go into the church, and they say one day, the inquisitor decided that a bunch of their new Jewish converts to Christianity only became Christian to save their neck. So they wanted to make sure that people knew not to do that. And so they invited all of these Jewish converts into the church. And then once they were all there and settled, they closed the door, locked it from the outside, and lit fire to the church, killing all within. Now, legend, reality, I'm not 100% sure, but I will tell you this. When you walk into that church, on the interior walls, you can still see the char marks from a great fire on the walls. The Portuguese Inquisition said that the death toll may have gotten as high as 40,000 people. So we've tried killing people. But we've also tried scaring people. Have you heard of like hellfire preaching, right? You know, you've maybe run into that, maybe at your last church, you ran into some hellfire preaching where we just try to scare people into church and into this Jesus thing. And we kind of know the day that hellfire preaching got started. July 8th is the day. July 8th, 1741, a man named Jonathan Edwards wrote a sermon and delivered a sermon that he titled, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. Listen to these words. This was an actual sermon. The God that holds you over the pit of hell as one holds a spider or some loathsome insect over the fire, this God abhors you and is dreadfully provoked. His wrath towards you burns like fire. He looks upon you as worthy of nothing else but to be cast into the fire. He has of purer eyes than to bear to have you in his sight. You are 10,000 times so abominable in his eyes as the most hateful, venomous serpent is in ours. Well, that's one way, right? You're just a bug God's dangling over hell. Get it right, he won't drop you in. Get it wrong, too bad for you, you're in hell, right? So we've tried killing people and we've tried scaring people to make disciples, but we've also tried just being what we might call relevant, right? We've copied people. What we've said is, what's culture doing? And we would find out what culture's doing, and then we would just sort of try to do that. But most often we would do it really poorly and not as good. Like we did it a lot with music, right? And some Christian music's okay, and other Christian music is really bad, like really bad. And we've done it with movies, and some Christian movies are okay. None are winning Oscars, and some are really, really bad. We've done it with fashion, right? How many of you still have your WWJD bracelet on, right? We've also done this with video games. You may not know this, but in the 90s, some people got together and they said, we're gonna make a video game that you can play on the original Nintendo gaming system. And it was called Bible Adventures. And this was an illegal, unlicensed game that played. So it totally should not have ever been purchased. But Christian bookstores decided to sell this game in the bookstores. And they sold 350,000 copies of this horrible game. I mean, it's one of the, in fact, like there's a list of like the worst games ever. Bible Adventures, number 68 on one of the 68 worst video game ever made. Similarly, in Texas, there was a church last year that decided they were gonna try to pull off the Hamilton musical. Probably not a great idea for lots of reasons. One, they didn't have like Broadway level like actors and singers doing that. They also changed the songs, and then at the end they tacked on a sermon, and this actually got them in a lot of trouble because there was a ton of copyright violations, and they ended up having to pay like an undisclosed amount of money. It was like this whole thing, right? So we've we all agree, let's go make disciples. And to do that, we've tried killing people, we've tried scaring people, we've tried copying people, and most recently, we've tried boycotting people, right? I feel like, I don't know, it's like really popular right now to boycott. It feels like every 2 weeks lately, I can't shop at Target anymore. You can't drink Bud Light, right? Disney's apparently out. And in California, we're boycotting the Dodgers right now, the Los Angeles Dodgers. You're not allowed to go to Dodger games in California anymore. And I was like, what? Why can't we? I don't even know what the Dodgers did, but apparently we can't go anymore. But I say all of that to say, I think maybe, we might be swinging and missing a little bit when it comes to Jesus' charge. Go and make disciples. Because maybe we don't have to kill people, scare people, copy people, or boycott people. Maybe it's easier than we think. Maybe Jesus, when he said go and make disciples, had a simpler way to change the world in mind. Maybe he was just inviting us to invite people into what we're already doing 3 times a day, eating and drinking. Maybe when Jesus said, go and make disciples, he didn't have killing, copying, scaring, or boycotting in mind. He had food in mind. And I hope he did, because I love to eat, and so do you. I love eating out. You all like to go out to eat and go out to a nice meal, right? I mean, I love like really great restaurants. It's just, and I know that probably most of you do, because the average American actually eats out 6 times per week. I actually can't afford to eat out 6 times per week. I've got a couple of kids. So this is per individual, so $4,000 per individual. So like my family of 4, that's a lot of money if we're eating out six times a week, right? But we do this because we love it. It's so fun to get some friends, go out to breakfast or lunch or dinner, right? It's just a really good time. But even with the cost, like inflation and the cost of eating out, we still do it all the time. But we don't just go out to eat. We often will invite people over. The average American actually hosts 7 dinner parties a year, spending about $200 to $300 per party, right? We love having people over. And these meals are so important to us that our society has basically agreed on what's an okay meal, like what's an okay party and what's a not okay party. There's some unspoken rules about what's okay to say and do and what's not okay to say and do at these parties. For example, here's actually the top 5 worst things you could possibly do if you're a guest at a dinner party. So don't do these. Number 1, show up sick. Do not show up and start coughing over everybody and saying, oh, I had a fever this morning, but I took ibuprofen. You still have a fever. You're just masking the symptoms with ibuprofen. And this got real serious, like with COVID and all of that. People are like, get out of my house. The other thing is, if you're a guest, don't ask for food or drink that isn't out. Right? Don't do that. Don't be like, oh my gosh, all this steak and ribs and everything is that. Do you have like microwavable mac and cheese I could get? Like don't do that. Here's one. Don't be the last to leave. Don't be that person, right? Because you're like, oh, we were having such a great conversation. No, they were just being nice, right? Or here's the thing, that if you do this, my wife is gonna be really grumpy at you because she's making us clean up until that doorbell rings, right? So do not show up early to a dinner party at our house. And then the last one is, and we should all know this, don't drink too much. Don't drink too much. Adult beverage, if that's for you, that's great, but not too much. Now, that's if you're a guest. If you're a host of the party, there are some things you shouldn't do as well. And the first is wait too long. Do not wait too long to put out food and drink. I mean, even if you don't have it, get some Ritz crackers, some chips and salsa, whatever. People came there to eat. Don't starve them, right? And here's a big one. Don't ask people to mingle. For some people, the social anxiety is real, right? And it took everything in them just to show up to your party, right? So now don't ask them to like work for you, like while they're there, right? It's your job. You're the host. You mingle. And then, today you can't just serve food that has dairy and gluten. You've got to have the dairy and gluten-free options. And then this is the one thing I do as a host, but I do it on purpose to deal with the one who's the last to leave. I start cleaning. If you're at my house ever and I'm cleaning, that's a sign that I want you to leave my house right now. Yeah, so I go to bed early. I'm getting old. I'm not hanging out till midnight. I don't care how good the conversation is. We can pick it up tomorrow, right? It's fine. And then, of course, the last one, too, for a host, don't indulge in adult beverage too much. Here's my point with all of this. Our meals matter, don't they? Our meals matter. They're important to us. Think about the meals you've had for a moment. What stories have played out in your life around a meal? What news, kind of life-shaping news has been shared, maybe? What meal was it where you laughed so hard your stomach hurt the next day, right? For me, I was a kid, and I grew up in the foster care system, but I would spend summers mostly with my grandparents. And my grandma, she's from Little Rock, Arkansas, and doesn't know anything about Mexican food at all. But she would always make burritos. But actually it was like her version of it was like a southern white woman's version of like a chimichanga that she would make. And so it would be just this like flour tortilla with like ground beef and cheddar cheese, no salsa, nothing, that she would fry up in a cast iron skillet. And for whatever reason, I loved those things as a kid. And even now, like telling you this story, I can like smell her kitchen, right? I loved grandma's. She didn't call them I don't know what she called them, but they were amazing. And when I think about meals in my life, I always go back to Grandma Jenan's kitchen and those fried up burritos with ground beef and cheddar cheese in them. What stories have played out in your life around meals? Maybe for you, you found love. You went on that first date, that person across the table from you, the conversation's going great, and something dawns on you and you just knew. You just knew, and now that person's sitting next to you. The most nervous I've ever been at a meal was the night I proposed to my wife. I wasn't even gonna propose at the meal. It was gonna be after the meal. And it was beautiful. The setting was incredible. We had a friend that was a manager of a restaurant, gave us like a private balcony looking out over the Pacific Ocean. I mean, it was just incredible. I don't remember a thing. All I remember is my hands sweating, knowing that I'm about to ask my wife to marry me, right? And I just kept fidgeting with the ring that was in my pocket. I couldn't tell you one thing my wife said. I couldn't say anything, but I remember dinner. I just remember being there and going, this meal is the precursor to like the biggest question I'm ever gonna ask. And I knew she would say yes. I'm a great catch. She was gonna say yes, right? I already knew the answer, but I was so nervous. Maybe for you, it wasn't love that you found at a meal, but maybe it was healing from a broken relationship. Maybe for you, maybe it was you, maybe it was somebody else, but they reached out, you hadn't talked to them in years. And you had lunch, or you had breakfast, or you had coffee, or whatever it is, and your relationship had a new beginning, and you found healing. For me, Grandma Jenan, who made those burritos. Again, I grew up in foster care, and so I hadn't really seen my parents in decades. And a few years back, though, my grandma calls me, and she says, your dad is dying, and I want you to go see him. You need to go see your dad, and you need to say goodbye. And I really don't ever say no to Grandma Jenan, but I was like, I don't want to do that, Grandma. I haven't seen him in decades. I really don't have anything nice to say to him. I don't know that I can do that. And she talked me into it, though. And so I go to the hospital. And he's now already at the point where he's coherent sometimes, coherent not others. And they had his tray, though. When I got there, his hospital tray of food with, the hospital Jell-O? And that was on the tray, and I was so nervous, and he was not really coherent. He was kind of in and out of consciousness. I was so nervous, I grabbed the Jell-O, and I just started eating his Jell-O. But I said to him, and I don't know if he heard me or not, and I like to hope and pray that he did, but I just said to him, Dad, we're okay. We're good. You can die knowing that you and I are at peace. You're forgiven, and it's worked out, and I'm sorry that you missed your grandkids. I mean, it was a pretty emotional kind of moment for me. But I told him over some hospital jello, it's okay. We're okay. Maybe for me, one of the most impactful meals was also a meal I never had. I was supposed to have it. My boss at the time, one of my very good friends, his name was Steve. We were to have lunch that day, and he called me and said, I gotta cancel, my head's killing me, I'm going to the doctor. Well, that evening, he called me from a hospital room in Fresno, which is the bigger town just a little bit north of us. And he said, next morning I'm having emergency brain surgery. So of course, the whole staff, we all went up there. 4.5 months later, he passed away. And I still look back and go, man, that was the meal I never had with him. Our meals matter. Sitting around a table, connecting over food is important. Life happens at those meals. In fact, even our word companion, it actually comes from 2 Latin words, together and bread. As in, a companion is someone you eat with, right? Eating together has a way of connecting us on kind of a pretty deeply spiritual level. And it's not just modern culture, right? Food was a really, really big deal to Jesus and in Jesus's world as well. And I don't know where you're at with Jesus, but for me, just so you know, Jesus is like North Star. I go to Jesus for all of life's big questions, and even little questions, even like, how should I operate around food, eating and drinking in my meals with people? Do you have anything to say about that, Jesus? And in fact, it turns out he actually has a ton to say about eating and drinking. And a lot of what Jesus thought about food actually happened 400 years before Jesus ever showed up on the scene of human history. See, 400 years before Jesus shows up, there was a superpower in the world at the time. They were called the Babylonians, and they existed in Iraq, modern day Iraq. And the Babylonians decide one day that they want Israel. And so they invade Israel, and they take out Israel. They wipe out Israel. They go into Jerusalem. They destroy their main city, Jerusalem, and they destroy their temple, which was the cultural and spiritual center of Jewish life. And they take it down. And then they kind of kidnap most of the Jews. And they take them back into this sort of forced detention back to Babylon, back to what is today Iraq. And now, so what they did is essentially Judaism, the Jewish faith, as it had been, the world had known it up to that point, is gone. The temple's gone, the altar that they would sacrifice to God is gone, their pastors are gone, it's all gone, and they're asking, okay, well, what do we do now? How do we practice our faith? And so the religious leaders, they get together and they come up with a new plan. They sort of reorient the Jewish faith, no longer around Jerusalem and the temple. Now they've got a new model, a new framework, because now most of the people, they're not even in Israel. They're not in Israel. There's no temple. That was where they saw heaven and earth meeting, right? There's no pastors. They don't know. What do we do? Here was the framework that the Jewish faith came up with 400 years before Jesus. Your home is the new temple. Your home is now the place where heaven and earth meet. Your table, this is the altar where you place your sacrifice to God. And your meal with people, that's the new sacrifice. And with that in mind, right, your home's the new temple, your table's the new altar, your meal's the new sacrifice. With that in mind, fast forward 400 years, Jesus shows up. There he is, right? The Jews are back in Israel, at least some of them are. The temple's been rebuilt. And in fact, historians, though, still think 2/3 of the Jewish people are living outside of Israel. And so the model's still in play, right? Your home is the new temple, your table's the new altar, and your meal's the new sacrifice. That's still in play. But if you can get to Jerusalem, you can get to the temple, that's great. But many still couldn't. And so we see Jesus playing this framework out, though, all the time, because for Jesus, life around the table, life around a meal, eating and drinking, was a really, really, really big deal. In fact, the biographers of Jesus, they just are constantly showing this guy eating all the time. One of the biographies we have of Jesus was written by a guy named Luke. He's a historian. He has Jesus and food together 54 times. Matthew, who we read from a little earlier, he puts Jesus and food together over 90 times. One Bible scholar just sums it up this way. His name is Robert Karras. He said this: Jesus is either going to a meal, at a meal, or coming from a meal. I want this on my tombstone. What was Forrest like? Well, he was either going to, at, or coming from a meal, right? That's how Jesus is presented in the biographies. The guy just ate all the time, right? In fact, there's a book out that I want all of you to read. It's just so great. It's impacted my life a ton. It's impacted Neighborhood Church a ton. It's written by a guy named Tim Chester. It's called A Meal with Jesus. And he highlights in the book why food is so important to Jesus. And specifically, he says there's a phrase that gets used by the people writing down the story of Jesus, and a phrase even used by Jesus himself to describe himself that's used a lot. It's the phrase Son of Man. Now, it's not their phrase. They are borrowing it from an ancient Hebrew prophet named Daniel. If you've ever heard the story, Daniel in the lion's den, same Daniel, he's got a book in the Jewish scripture, our Old Testament, named after him. And he is the one that came up with this phrase, Son of Man. And the Son of Man is describing the one that would come in authority, with the authority of God. And so the authors of the Gospels, the biographies of Jesus, and Jesus himself, they're saying, yeah, that's Jesus. And Jesus saying, yeah, that's me. I'm the Son of Man that comes with authority. And what Tim Chester points out, and this is so big, in his book, A Meal with Jesus, he says there's only 3 times that this phrase, the Son of Man came, and then the blank gets filled in. There's only 3 times that happens. The first, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. The second, the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. And then the third one, the Son of Man came eating and drinking. Are you kidding me? How can you not follow Jesus if that's his deal, right? Like, he could have, think about all the ways that he could have been described. All the ways. He could have come preaching, religious ideology or political ideology, or, they could have said anything. No. Jesus came eating and drinking. And the first 2 statements, these are statements of purpose. Why did Jesus come? Well, Jesus came to serve and seek and save the lost, right? The third statement, that eating and drinking, that's about method. How did he do that? Here's how Chester sums it up. Jesus' mission, what he did, was to seek and save the lost. Jesus' method for doing that, for making those disciples, eating and drinking. The Son of Man came, eating and drinking. Now, this strategy absolutely annoys the heck out of the religious gatekeepers of Jesus' day, because the Jews, they believed in a Son of Man coming. They were all in on that idea, but he was coming in as a conquering hero. He wasn't coming in serving people with food and drink. Are you kidding me? And Jesus does this so much, he gets attacked for it. It's sort of a rumor that gets spread about him. Here's what they say about him. Look at Jesus. He's a glutton and a drunkard, and he eats with all the wrong people. He's a friend of tax collectors and sinners. And Jesus' first followers, they kind of get attacked for doing the same thing. John, that's John the Baptist. John's disciples, they fast and pray, very spiritual. And so did the disciples of the Pharisees. That's like a sect of religious leadership within Judaism. But yours, Jesus, all they do is they go around eating and drinking. That was their reputation. I want that to be my reputation, right? Jesus spent a lot of time eating and drinking, and he clearly taught his followers to do the same thing. His mission strategy for changing the world was a long meal that stretched into the evening. Jesus didn't have Michelin-starred restaurants, but he understood the value of sitting at a table with just a simple meal, grilled fish for him, loaf of bread, pitcher of wine. Jesus spent so much time, I think, eating and drinking because it was more than just you need food to live for him. Jesus' meals, they represented something bigger, a new vision for life, a new vision for how to do life. Jesus' meals weren't just symbols. No, they were life application. This is how you're to live. Right? Jesus' meals, they were these, think of them maybe as teaching manuals. Here's how to follow me. Here's how to flourish and live out of my way of love. And again, it gets them into trouble. In fact, it gets them into so much trouble. Most scholars and historians think it's Jesus' meals and specifically who he ate with that gets Jesus executed. That Jesus ate with is what killed him. And we're told that because in Jesus' day, meals were used to divide and separate and keep the haves and the have-nots out, who's in, who's out, all of that. And Jesus just flipped the script and he says, no, our meals are to be an example of the great welcome of God for all people. And so he ate with the people that were on the out, the tax collectors, right? And if you don't know, they were like the most hated people in Israel. They were Jewish people working from the Roman government, ripping their friends off. Sinners was just a blanket statement. That was anyone that sort of was Jewish by name only, not in practice. They didn't live the lifestyle. And this practice of eating and saying, no, everybody's welcome to the table, this is what gets him killed. Maybe think of it like this. Jesus cared so much about eating and drinking that it was so important to him, that it was so key to his strategy for changing the world, he was willing to die for it. He died at least in part because he believed in sharing meals with people that maybe not everybody else thought he should. Think about his miracles. His first miracle, he turned water into wine at a wedding feast. He fed the 5,000. If you look at the end of the Bible, you go all the way to the end, that scary book of Revelation. It's really not scary. You should read it, but it's okay. But how does heaven get presented? It gets presented as a wedding feast, a banquet. That's what's heaven going to be like? It's going to be like a meal at a wedding. In fact, Jesus, right before he's executed, you know what he says? He gathers everybody together. He says, guys, I'm going to be gone. But when I'm gone, I want you to regularly have a meal in my honor to remember me. Today we call it communion or the Eucharist. Eucharist is just a fancy word for thank you. And here's Jesus. He gets recorded setting this meal up. He said, and he took the bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, this is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. So eat in remembrance of me. And likewise, the cup, after they drink and eaten, saying, this cup that is poured out for you, this is the new covenant. This is my new way of doing things in my blood. He drank. Here's my point. And it's real simple. Because Jesus came eating and drinking, I think we would do well to follow his lead. We don't need to resort to violence, scare tactics, copying people, boycotting. We just need to make space for people around some good food. Jesus seemed to think that sitting down for a meal with someone was the simplest and most effective way to change the world. Therefore, go and make disciples, followers of me. How, Jesus? How do we do that? Make space for them around a good meal. Because now your home is the place where heaven and earth collide. Your table, that's the altar. And the meal you serve, this is your sacrifice to Creator God. This is how we change the world. I think it's always been the plan. We just lost it. You know, when we sit down with somebody at a table, you know what we say to them? We're saying, I see you. And if I see you, my Jesus sees you. When you eat with somebody, you're putting flesh and blood on the message of love. And isn't that what Jesus was? Jesus was the embodiment of love. And he's just saying, yeah, go do that. It just works best around food. We can talk to people all day long. Share a meal, hear their story. I tell people at Neighborhood, I say, listen, It's fine that you're here and you don't believe what we believe. You're welcome to be a part of our family. It's okay. But I said, I just want to warn you, you can't eat with us for very long before you become one of us. Because it just works that way. We don't have to worry about what's next. Let Jesus handle that. We just make our meals our sacrifice to him. Does that sound okay? Yeah? Can I pray for us? Jesus, well, we're sorry for making it so complicated. Over the years, man, we've just muddied it up a bit. When you've just asked us to sit down and eat, to change the world one meal at a time. That's what you did. And that's what you've invited us into, because when we do it, we say, I see you. And if I see you, my Jesus sees you. Jesus, we love you. And it's in your name we pray. Amen. Thanks, guys.